Good morning, my friends. I am just sharing this video. Just give me one moment and I will be right with you. We are going to be talking today about step 3 of the 12-step program of the Alcoholics Anonymous. What we do is we're going to talk about every week for the next 12 weeks of one of the steps and how it fits the depression and anxiety model. So we know that AA started this beautiful program for the Alcoholics Anonymous, and it took 12 steps. Each step was an advancement to full recovery. Each step was an advancement to freedom for this vice, for this thing that was consuming people's lives, alcohol. So in step first, in the first week, we talked about the need to understand what you have and to accept whatever it is that you have. In the case of AA, it is alcohol addiction. So in the case of depression, anxiety, or whatever it is in your life, addiction, whatever you are stuck on and you really can't get yourself out, it could be sex, it could be alcohol, it could be gossip, it could be gambling, anything. Anger is a type of addiction as well. So we'll see that in the first step, we have to understand that everything in your life became affected by this vice, this thing that you have. And we have to understand that unless I admit that my life is in chaos and my life is unmanageable, then I can't do anything about it. So the first step, we talked about it. It was admitting the problem. And the second step, we talked about understanding that there is a higher power, in this case, God, that could help you with your troubles, and that alone, we can't do it alone. Very few people get out of a depression or lessen their anxiety alone without getting any help. So once we introduce God into our lives, then we can understand that there is hope. Of course, Kardec and the Spirit's book, the very first question asks, what is God? And we know that God is the supreme power, the supreme intelligence, the cause of all things. God does not create any type of evil, but that is created by us, by making the wrong choices. And so we can't blame God. We have to at some point stop blaming the world, blaming God, and understand that Kardec brings this information that God is the supreme intelligence and the primary cause of all things, for us to understand that we are his children and he does exist and he is with us the entire time. And he is the supreme intelligence and he knows best. So that's step 2, to understand that he exists. Now, step 3, today we'll be talking about it in both senses, depression and anxiety, as we have been doing every week. The first thing about step 3, the first 2 steps were about contemplating, about reflecting on the idea that, yes, I have a problem, and yes, God does exist. But from now on, step 3 to 12, it requires action. Now, step 3 of the program, and by the way, why the 12 steps for the AA? Because it is the most successful model that works for addiction. And coincidentally enough, is the model that mostly involves God. So you see, the more we get closer to God, the more we get closer to science, it will unite with faith. The more we know about faith, the more we know about science, because God is science as well. So anyway, the step 3, it's impossible for you to get recovery, for you to free yourself from your addictions if you don't introduce God into your play. So the 12-step program is exactly that. Once you have the 12-step program down pat, you can use to any step in your life. So step 3, it talks about accepting, but not just accepting. Now you have to surrender to God. Now, this may be very odd for people that are atheists or agnostics or are not believing, but think about it. Once you walked into an AA program, an Alcoholics Anonymous program, you are already surrendering yourself to that program because you have lost everything you had. You already surrendered to something higher than you. In this case, even the program itself. Of course, we're talking about a much, much higher being, not just a program, but God. Once you do surrender, and faith is exactly that. It's trust and surrender. You can't trust and not surrender, because that's a trust without action. But you also can't take action and surrender to a cause that you know nothing about. In this case, trusting in God. So for your addictions, for your depression in this case, when we're depressed, we are running away from the world. We are turning the light off. We are not accepting things the way they are happening. And I'm not saying that this is in full conscience. Sometimes it's in an unconscious part of our brain where depression just hits us and we know nothing about where it came from. But then what do? We run away from the world and we hide within ourselves. We go into our bedroom, we close the door, we go under the covers, and we turn the light off to the world. So once we understand that we have this problem, that God exists, but now I am going to take action and surrender myself to His will and not my will. And what is God's intention for you? We all have a purpose here. Every one of us has a purpose. So what is God's purpose for your life? And we all have it. And sometimes we may go into a state of depression because we feel useless. We feel that we're not worthy. We feel that there is no control, that we can't do anything about whatever situation it is in our lives. And that is not true, because once we surrender to His will and we really trust that the Creator didn't create anybody for their demise, for their fall, then we understand that, wait a minute, I'm just like anybody else, and I can succeed, and I will succeed. In step 3, the biggest word is willingness. I have to want to get better, and I have to accept God's help. And step 1 was all about accepting my faults, accepting that something was taking over my life and it became unmanageable. And step 2 was about believing that there is a higher being. Step 3 is willing to surrender to this higher being. So now you have to take steps into changing your life. In the case of the depressed, well, willing to change, willing to open, to turn the light back on, willing to go and seek help, to be part of a group, to be part of this world that you were happy before. Because most people who suffer from depression, they say that they had moments that they were very happy. So we know that we're not depressed beings. We are just going through periods of depression that we can lessen or we can get rid of it much faster if we really introduce God. The second part, people that are always anxious, people that are always uncertain of the future. And again, for you to have a syndrome of really this chaotic thought, these chaotic thoughts that everything will not work out. When you are so embedded in this stress and this anxiety, living in a day where I am vulnerable, and we talked about that in the past. I am vulnerable, the future is uncertain, and the world is a hostile place. Well, this is a perfect storm for everything bad to happen. And that is the primary example. It's the triad, really. It's a psychological triad for anxiety. Believing that you are vulnerable, believing that the world is a hostile place, and believing that the future is uncertain. And we see this if we watch the news for very long. It kind of confirms that triad, and people do begin to feel depressed, and not depressed, but anxious. And they go hand in hand. Very hard someone who's depressed and not anxious, or anxious and does not lead to depression. So that's why we chose those two things. So anxiety, when you act and when you surrender to God's will and your own will, because nobody can free you from anything unless you decide to. See, and that's an action. Once you take the action of saying, I surrender, I will want to be helped, and I will take the necessary steps to get the help I need. Nobody can do this for you. I know sometimes people come to me and they say, Debbie, can you go to somebody's house who needs help? And I always say, can I get a phone call from them asking for me to go? Anything. Why? Because you see how Jesus said you have to ask and you shall receive. You knock and the door will be open. You can't expect things to come to you. And that is a sign of ego as well. When we want all others to do for us, why is that I don't want to do for myself? So that humbles you down when you surrender to God, to this higher, the highest power. And when you really understand that you can trust him, you start to feel relief. So your stress, your anxiety will say to you, no, I surrender to God. I am not vulnerable because he is with me and I will walk with him. Second, the world is not a hostile place because there is God who cares for this world. It appears to be hostile because we are making this hostile, but not him. And he didn't create this hostile place. And I can get out of this hostile mindset. And the future is not uncertain. We know as spiritists that the only thing sure is for us to be with God, for us to progress, for us to really walk this path to perfection as our brother Jesus is. So once we believe that we're always progressing by working our intellect and by working our sense of morality, of ethics, of caring, of charity, and you can't be good down the road if you're not taking steps and being good now. We have to always take steps to achieve that. And lastly, talk about, we all heard of this serenity prayer. And that is the step 3. When we understand that there is a door, I have a door in front of me, whether I have depression or anxiety, the door is there for a better day. But I have to put the key in the door and I have to turn it and I have to open the door. And for me to do that, I have to be willing to do this. I have to be willing to take the step and to do all this work. We have faith all the time. We have faith in our mechanic that fixed our car and it's not going to just cause an accident on the road. We have faith in the pilot when we go in a plane that he took all the lessons that he needed to take. We have faith in so much more than we think. So it's not all lost for all of those who don't believe in God because they believe in things much smaller than God. All we have to do is take down this pride and this egotistic self and really understand that if you have faith in the architect and the engineer that created your house and you sleep with the thought that the walls are not going to fall down, then the architect and the engineer of the world is much more than that and he cares for you. So you do have to surrender and trust. So once we break these little things of faith, then we can fully have faith in the Almighty. So the serenity, this whole thing that step 3 brings to us, this willingness to change, to take action, to introduce God to us. It says, God, give me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. Give me the strength, the courage to change the things that I can change. And the wisdom to know the difference. And so let it be thy will and not mine. So how beautiful is that if you are depressed or anxious because you want to control something that you can't control. Sometimes we get anxious because we don't know how the interview will be, or because somebody left and we don't know when they're coming back. Well, when you surrender this to God's will, and when you surrender this power and ask him to watch out over that person, or to give you the serenity, even the peace of mind to do well in the interview, well, then you have control over that. You have no control over certain things, but you have control whether you prepare yourself or not for the interview, or for when someone is going somewhere, maybe a child is going to spend the night over and you start feeling anxious, or your car is making a noise and you start feeling anxious. You have control over some situations, to check the motor, to check the engine, to bring it to a mechanic, but you don't have control over how others drive. You see, when you become serene about how the world functions, because you don't have power over it, then anxiety will lessen. When you Choose to do something on the things that you can control and you have control in the case of depression. Then also life becomes more serene because I do have control over taking steps to bettering myself. I can be as depressed as anything, but I can choose to begin to grow and to strengthen my faith. At any point, we can be in jail and nobody owns our mind. We can start connecting or reconnecting to God. So again, ask God to give you the serenity to really, really accept everything, accept the things you can't change. In Spiritism, we call this atonements, expiations. We have lived past lives and we have done things that weren't good. And now we're here to repair them. So let's repair with happiness, with dignity, and understand that sometimes we'll be born with something, some defects. I hate that word, but let's say some things that are not as everybody else's, abnormal, whatever you want to call. I'm not here to cause controversy, but we know our own faults. Let's make that word, the faults. We have some faulty things sometimes, and we're here to repair them. So if I have no control over my fault, then I have to accept it and I have to make the best out of it. Now, if I have courage to do the things that I can change, that's wonderful, because then all I need, I already have the courage. All I need is to invite God and to say, hey, can we do this together? And when God is in your team, you can't fail. Failure is not an option. So you see why third step is so important. When God is in your team, you will not fail. But if you do not accept him, when you don't humble down, when you believe that you are the Almighty, when there is nothing that created you, when there is nothing that is watching over you, it is a very sad way of thinking, because then you are alone. And then really there's not much purpose to this life. Why do good anyway, if it's going to end in nothing and nothingness? But when we humble ourselves down, when we start really studying how beautiful God is and how perfect and amazing and how so he exists right next to us, right inside of us, then our outlook changes. So step 3, we have to walk towards that. We have to make this decision to really say, I need to invite God into my life. I need to really have faith, to really have this willingness to change. I can't do it alone. Well, my friends, thank you so much. I'm happy you are all here today. In the AA, Alcoholic Anonymous, they say that the most dependent on God, the most independent we become. Remember that. The more you depend on God, the more independent from all vices, from anything that wants to take over your life you become. Because he knows best. And the more you depend on him and surrender to his will, then the more independence you will have in this world. You will be able to free yourself from anything that harms you. Thank you so much. We'll be here with step 4 next Sunday at 8:30. And now I'm going to move to my own personal Facebook page. You're all invited. I will be speaking in Portuguese, the same thing, on my page that happens at 9 a.m. Right after the show. Thank you so much. Listen to Kardec Radio. It's a great channel. And I hope you all have a really wonderful Sunday and a really wonderful day. And remember, invite him into your life. He doesn't go in forcefully. He needs to be invited. Thank you and have a wonderful Sunday.